Okay, welcome back to part two of our video for week two. We were talking about the very important concept of elasticity. And we have elasticity of demand, elasticity of supply, and income elasticity. There are other elasticities, cross-price elasticities, and others. The main ones we will concern ourselves with are elasticity of demand, elasticity of supply, and income elasticity. Now, we said elasticity is responsiveness. How much does the quantity respond to change in price? Or how much does that quantity respond to a change in income? Now, there are a lot of factors that can affect the elasticity, let's say, of demand. First of all, well, not surprisingly, availability of substitutes. Is there something else that you can use in its place? If there are not any substitutes available, for instance, if you contracted a serious disease and there was only one pharmaceutical company that made that drug and there's no other substitutes, well, you know, unfortunately, you're pretty stuck. It's going to be a rather inelastic demand curve for that particular vaccine. As time changes, though, typically other goods come in that are more of a substitute and making it more elastic. But without any substitutes, it's going to be inelastic. Luxuries, comforts, and necessities, we talked about that a little bit. Well, typically the demand for food, clothing, and shelter, the necessities of life, are pretty much are there. We are pretty well stuck. They're going to be rather inelastic. Comforts would be something that, we used to have an old professor used to talk about. That's when they had a lot of black and white TVs. A comfort would be having a color TV, and maybe you have a couple black and white TVs in your house. Perhaps you would think that having a TV would be a necessity. A comfort would be a color TV. A luxury would be having a color TV in every room in the house, all right? But a comfort is just that. And it is a little bit more elastic than a necessity, because a necessity is what you need for life. And then we go all the way up to a luxury. Those would have the greatest elasticities, which we talked about just a minute ago. Okay? Another one is percentage of your income. You know, you buy a certain spice for the holidays every year, and let's say that spice costs, $2. You get to the store, and guess what? The price is $3. Well, you know, that's a 50% increase in the price of that particular item, but it's such a small percentage of your income that, generally speaking, if it's a small percentage of your income, you're going to buy it anyway. So it's going to be rather inelastic, no change. Okay. However, as a percentage of your income goes up, for instance, a car or a home or something, then we take a much closer look at it. Time is interesting. Time is both the same for elasticity of demand and elasticity of supply. More time, and I think you see it in your book, more time makes both the demand and supply more elastic. Time, for instance, if you drove in the good old days when you were coming to class, you drove in, you had practically no gas as you pulled into the parking lot, and while you were in the class, some godforsaken thing happened and the price of gas went up $3 a gallon. Well, if you had just about zero gas in your tank, you're pretty well stuck. When you leave class, you've got to go buy some gas. So you don't have a lot of options. So your quantity is not going to change. But given more time, you'll have more options and you can make different changes. So that will help you, all right? But little time, rather inelastic. More time, more elastic. You can look at different options, different type of car, or taking a bus or a bike, all these other options. Okay, more time, more elastic. All right, and then finally, definition of the market. Well, that means, for instance, are we talking about, remember we mentioned food, clothing, and shelter. Well, if we just say, shelter, well, that's a necessity, all right? How we define the market is very important. Now, shelter, we need shelter in order to live, so that's going to be rather inelastic. But now are we talking about just basic shelter from the elements, or now are we talking about a small apartment, or now are we talking about, about a nice home, or then a really nice home, or a super luxurious home? As we define the market differently, the elasticities can change. Okay? Now, for elasticity of supply, the key here is inputs. Are they available? All right, and at what cost? You've got to match the cost as well. Now, sometimes this happened to us. We get a call from General Motors. They'll pay more for these parts or anything, but the raw material wasn't available. Well, if the inputs are not available, you cannot respond. So availability of inputs is very important. If they are available, and you don't have to, for instance, you don't have to go and spend an arm and a leg at a special, let's say, aluminum warehouse to get the inputs into your operation, that's fine. Then you can respond. Some items are real tough. For instance, land, hotel rooms, things like that, golf courses. I mean, even if the price of people playing golf was doubled, well, it takes time to develop a golf course. Or in the case of land, and I know they use this in the book, there's only so much, land, oceanfront property. All right, so the supply, there's not available amount of supply. So that's going to limit, it's going to limit your response. All these things can limit your response in terms of supply. And then finally, time. Again, time will make more things elastic. All right? Now, as we talk about income elasticity, again, these are the goods: normal, luxury, inferior. Normal goods, well, they will have a relatively normal type of elasticity. Luxury, probably a big change for the luxury goods. Inferior goods, actually, your income goes up, you will end up buying less. Okay, so now we got, and remember, when we're talking about elasticity, in general, just imagine, the more inelastic, the more vertical the lines are going to be, whether they're demand or supply lines, all right? Now, taxes, all right? Well, when government takes taxes from us, all right, and we're going to talk about this more in fiscal policy, it's no surprise. You and I have less money to spend, all right? Well, if we have less money to spend, in general, it's going to move the demand curve less to the left. Same thing with the suppliers. If they, if they are getting hit with a large tax, that would be considered a cost to them, and they have a fixed budget, so they also will be shifting to the left. Okay, so let's see what happens in terms of taxation. Well, first of all, we talk about sales tax. That's a flat tax. Is that fair? And if we had more time for debate, we would talk about, hey, is a flat tax better than a progressive tax? Typically, a sales tax, a lot of folks will argue, hurts the poor more because it's let's say in the state of Michigan, it's 6%. It used to be 4% for a long time, but now it's 6%. Whether you're making $1 million or $10,000 a year, if you buy a little something, it's 6% sales tax. Now, to their credit, I will say that at least they discounted, or they took food and medicine, out of that equation. So that helps a little bit, especially for the poor folks. Excise tax is a specific tax on a particular good or service, okay? Now, progressive tax, obviously, is the one that we'll talk about a little bit more down the line. It grows as your income grows, okay? But anyway, in general, taxes do take money from the demanders and or the suppliers, okay? Now, the tax incidence, all that means is who bears the burden of the tax. A lot of times you think, it's just a supplier is going to pay it. That's not always the case. Now, in this particular graph, before, if you recall, we had this whole blue section. This whole thing was blue, consumer surplus. And this bottom triangle was all red, producer surplus. What has happened here now? All right, let's say we had a price of $4, okay, for the item. And at that point, we had our regular blue and red triangles, all right? But the government has instituted a dollar tax. Now, if you notice, the demand curve and the supply curve, they're about equal in terms of the angle. Their elasticity is just about equal. In this type of scenario, let's say that the tax is being implemented. Well, the demand curve will shift back, okay? But what is happening? When it does shift back to here, that brings us to a price of $3.50 for the supplier, okay? However, if we bring it up, at this point, we bring it up to where the demanders are. The demanders, consumers, are paying $4.50. See, so when this dollar tax came in, it wasn't just the producers picking up the whole bill. The demand did shift back to here, so the suppliers now are only getting, they used to get $4, but now we're here, so now they're only getting $3.50. On the other side of the coin, we consumers, we were paying $4, now we are paying $4.50. This whole green area, that's the tax. That's what the government is collecting. So as you can see, the consumer surplus and the producer surplus, they get pinched, all right? Because they have to make way for the tax revenue. And more importantly, we look at the black wedge right here. That is dead weight loss. Nobody gets it, all right? So nobody is benefiting from that, okay? So in this scenario, when the elasticity and the angle of the supply and demand curve, because they have similar elasticities, are the same, they both end up bearing cost evenly, all right? This was, again, here, this is what it looked like before the tax, okay? And here's what it looks like now. You see that demand shifted back to there. The suppliers got 50 cents less. You and I had to pay 50 cents more. So that's where the dollar was split up. All right, now with different elasticities. And remember, more inelastic, the more vertical the line is going to be. It tries to come perfectly inelastic, tries to make a giant eye. All right, in this case, we'll just go through a couple. Here we have a demand curve that's more elastic. The supply curve, as you can see, is more upright. It's more inelastic. Well, if we had a tax here, with the supply curve being more inelastic, guess what? They end up picking up more of the burden of the tax. So, and if you ever see that in a question, who picks up more of the burden of a tax, whoever has the more inelastic curve, supply or demand. In this case, here, the suppliers, they're only getting 15, and we're getting charged 20. So of this $5, we are only picking up 2, where the suppliers are picking up 3, because the supply curve is more inelastic. So in this case, since they're not even as they were here, whoever has the more inelastic, more vertical curve will end up picking up more of the tax. In this case, we've got the suppliers picking up more of the tax. Now, in the case of a totally inelastic product, the governments love that one because, see, here again, we still have that black wedge here. Here is a totally inelastic demand curve. All right, now what's happened? If the government institutes a tax, all right, if supply shifts over, we were here, now it's all the way up to here. This whole area, which was part of our consumer surplus, it moves all the way up to here. Now that is the tax, all right? But you'll notice something. For a totally inelastic demand curve, as I said, the more inelastic, the bigger burden you bear. Well, if a good is totally inelastic, you and I, as consumers, we bear all of the burden, okay? And that's exactly what happens. And that's why governments love to tax inelastic goods and services, because there is no, if you notice, this is the only one that has no dead weight loss, because there's no drop in quantity that's being transacted for. All right, so anything that's got a totally inelastic demand curve, governments will love this one, because here they pick up this chunk from us, okay? And since it's totally inelastic, we don't respond by buying less, because we have to buy the same amount. So governments really, really like this one, okay? All right. Let's move on to the next board. And basically it's just, you know, how much, and I know in your book it's got it, how much is too much of a tax? Well, you know, it's like everything else. Moderation, everything in moderation. Same thing is true with taxing, okay? In this case, you know, let's face it, government does need funds. They have to, you know, there's a whole list of items the government needs funding for. So we can't just say, you know, let's not have any funds for the government. Government needs funds, whether it's for national defense, international highway system, just Food and Drug Administration. Just there are certain things the government needs money for. So if they institute something like this, well, we see, yeah, they got a little tax, but it wasn't quite enough. Okay, so here, this kind of taxation, it's not going to generate enough money for the government. Okay, now if we go to this extreme, this is way too. Look at that black wedge, dead weight loss, a killer. It can kill an industry, overtax an industry, and you can kill it. Okay, so in this case, that's too much, right? Here's kind of like the Goldilocks version where it's just right. Now, interestingly, in 1974, Arthur Laffer, and he was right around my time when I was in Washington. He was at the Hotel Washington. He was naturally where all good economists would be in the bar at the Hotel Washington, drawing economic graphs on cocktail napkins. And he drew, it's written wrong in our textbook. It actually looked like this. And what his point was that, government, there's a certain golden era or golden area that governments should strive for, because here, if this is the tax rate, and as the tax rates are going up, okay, and here is the amount of revenue the government is collecting. So, it makes sense as the tax rate's going up, this is rising, more revenue, more revenue, more revenue. Government, is collecting more and more revenue. But at some point, the tax burden becomes so onerous or so heavy that it's actually going to go in reverse. They keep raising the tax, and people are going to start working less. People are not going to be going out to try to invest in just about anything. Why bother? The rule of thumb is that, hey, I'm giving, and before JFK cut the marginal rates back in the early 60s, we had some huge tax rates, and it was killing incentive. So to the effect that what Arthur Laffer was arguing was that there is a certain golden point where you will maximize your government revenue, which would be right around here, because if you keep raising the tax rate, actually government revenue will start to fall. I know that's being debated back and forth, but when you think about it, it does kind of make pretty decent sense. Okay, all right. We're gonna have a really good discussion question coming up. I looked at a couple. I think your discussion answers so far pretty good. Let's make them as inclusive as we can. I don't want to see just a 1 or 2 sentence answer, because these things are worth 40 points. So I want to see a well thought out discussion, question, answer. All right, and you're going to have plenty of time when we take these exams. There are 4 exams with each that will have 8, fairly substantial essay questions. So the tempo of this course will absolutely pick up after another week or so. We start off slowly, because we are experiencing, and we're looking at concepts and ideas for the first time that are major economic concepts. So we start off slowly, but believe me, the tempo of the class, I don't think any student has ever disagreed with that. The tempo of the class will definitely pick up, okay? We're going to be getting into next week, in addition to taxation, and this will be, there'll be some major league questions on this. How else does government meddle in the marketplace? And the 3 that come to mind that we're going to be spending a fair amount of time on are price ceilings, price floors, and quotas. All right? A ceiling, price ceiling, again, I don't want to go into it too deeply today. We're going to go into it next week quite a bit. But a ceiling is the price cannot go above the ceiling. Just think of a ceiling. The price cannot go above the ceiling, all right? And it's a mandated price by the government. Same way with a price floor. The price cannot go below the floor, all right? Minimum wage would be a classic example of a price floor. Price cannot go below the price floor. Now a quota, that is not a price control, it is a quantity control, all right? And we're going to talk about the quotas that were instituted, started by the big three when they started to notice that Japan was starting to really take a lot of the market from them. And then Japan graciously offered to institute voluntary quotas, which they knew they had to do anyway, because if they didn't, we would have. But quota is quantity control. Price ceiling is control on the price, how high it can go. And a price floor is our government control on how low a price can go. And we'll talk about this next week. You can put a price ceiling anywhere on this graph, or a price floor anywhere on this graph, or a quota anywhere on this graph, but in only one instance, and only one side of our equilibrium point, is it going to mean anything? Is it going to be effective or binding? Okay? We'll talk about that all more next week. Everybody keep up with your readings. And when you see the next discussion question, let's do a real good job on that. And then we'll start prepping for that first exam. Okay? All right, everybody. You have a good week, and I'll see you all next week.